Welcome to Thomistic Womanhood. In today's video, we're going to continue the goodness series, and we're going to talk about a concept called playfulness, having a sense of humor about life, not taking everything so seriously. Men really appreciate that about women, because men can kind of be very serious. Men are just very regimented, sometimes they're just very structured. And women are more fluid and playful, and we kind of color outside the lines, because we just thought it looked better, and we just we're a little more free-spirited. And that can be very attractive to men, that playfulness and that sense of joy and wonder. This is a little different than the video before, where we talked about radiant happiness. That is just happiness in general. What I'm talking about here is a little different. I mean, obviously you have to be kind of cheerful and happy to pull this off, but I'm talking about, like I said, a sense of playfulness, you don't take life very seriously. I mean, obviously there's certain parts of life that you take seriously, that we all should take seriously, but you don't sweat the small stuff. You kind of take things in stride, and again, you're playful and you have kind of almost a childlike nature. If you look at children, it's very interesting to see kind of how they conduct themselves, and you can often learn stuff, I mean, obviously you're a grown woman, so the childlikeness only goes so far, but there just has to be a certain lightness, and a lot of that, how that comes up is, again, sense of humor. You have to be willing to take a joke, you have to be willing to make a joke. Sometimes men can get very serious, and sometimes you gotta kind of poke fun at them a little bit, kind of get that ego back down to earth a little bit. Sometimes men just they take themselves a little too seriously, and so there's that. And then children have a certain bluntness to them, so don't be afraid to be blunt and say exactly something. Maybe a guy wants to take you to a restaurant and you don't want to go there, and you're kind of embarrassed of the reason, and he's like, why don't you want to go there? And you're like, honestly, I went there before and the waiters smell like fish. And it's so blunt, but what else are you gonna say? So children have a very blunt, unfiltered way of talking, and sometimes there's really no way to state something unless it's in kind of a funny, blunt way. Obviously don't be blunt and hurt his feelings, well, we went to the restaurant and you smelled like fish. That's rude. You see the difference there? Before, you weren't necessarily talking about him, and you have to kind of say it with a smile on your face and lightly, because it can kind of come off as very snarky and bratty if you if you said well, I went there and the waiters all smelled like fish. That's kind of a much more bratty way, so again, tone in the way you say it means a lot. But yeah, a certain childlikeness, again, this kind of blunt way of speaking. Another thing about children is they have kind of tender feelings, it's easy to hurt their feelings, and they can often misunderstand you over something kind of silly. And so there is it can be easier to resolve conflicts when you do have kind of a more, I don't want to say childlike spirit, because that probably sounds so degrading, but really it is. We women, children and us women, we often have that in common. We can both have very tender feelings that can often get hurt, and the guy often doesn't even intend to hurt our feelings. And so sometimes children, assuming they come from a loving home, and they haven't been abused or they don't have messed up parents, but in general, a child who's been from a loving home, they're very honest. They're well, it hurt my feelings that you didn't play with me because you didn't like my truck, and you're okay, that's completely ridiculous, but okay. Obviously you're not going to tell them it's ridiculous, but you're hearing it and you're okay. But it's so simple, and at least the problem, and now you can reassure them, well, it has nothing to do with your truck, So it's kind of the same thing. Us women, sometimes when you kind of have a fight with your boyfriend or something, sometimes the childlike way is the best way because it resolves the conflict. You know, you can just say, well, I felt like you were dismissing me when you said that about, you know, like let's say you're an artist and you paint a lot, and you know, you showed a painting to him and you were like excited, you know, you're like, look what I did. And he goes, wow, it's got a lot of black, like, ugh. And you're like, it totally hurts your feelings, you know. Instead of getting all upset and like not talking about it, or, you know, playing it off like, oh, I'm fine, you know, because he's going to notice you're upset. Honestly, sometimes the childlike blunt way is the best. Just be like, well, you know, I was really proud of my painting and it hurt my feelings that you said there was a lot of black in it, because it made me feel like you thought it was stupid, you know? And so things like that. So again, this childlikeness is really important. Another final area of childlikeness is anger. Children can be adorable when they're angry, but you know, they will often, this is something that gets talked about in a book called Fascinating Womanhood. This is like the OG of like femininity books. This is out in the 60s. I know YouTube has like a femininity movement, but this movement has been going on for decades, newsflash, YouTubers. But anyways, they talk about that in this book, and it's one of the big criticisms in this book. People go, oh, that book teaches you to like stamp your foot and blah, blah. And this is where that came from. There is a section on that childlike spirit. And yes, children will stamp their feet when they're mad, or they'll like shake their head or something, or do something kind of silly, you know, or they'll like beat on your leg or something, and it's ridiculous because they're so little, they're not gonna hurt you, but yet they're sitting there trying to hurt you, and you're like, oh my gosh, that's hilarious, adorable. But that was actually suggested in the book, like, you know, maybe you should like beat on his chest. What was the other one? Stamp your feet, you know. And so some of you, when you are angry, that can be an authentic response, you know? Like, have you ever just felt so upset? You were just like, oh, you know, like you just like, you know, like you felt like doing something silly. So sometimes having a childlike expression of anger can actually be a good thing, you know, because it kind of diffuses the tension. You know, if you can just say like, I don't know, maybe like take his arm and like shake him a little bit, not in like a real angry way, like I'm not talking like domestic violence here, you know, but I'm just like, maybe out of frustration you can just like shake his arm, you know, and in like a gentle way. But you know, it's kind of, there are certain like little silly ways to like express your anger, you know, like it doesn't, the point of the book is not that you should stamp your feet when you're angry, because again, for some of us that's not really that, like I am very into being feminine and I've never felt like stomping my feet when I'm angry. Like that's just not the expression that I have. But I have friends who do, you know, they're very extroverted, like that's how they are, you know? So again, think it over, you know, if you feel absolutely silly doing something like that, you don't have to do that. But if you can find kind of a silly, childlike way to vent your anger, sometimes, again, if this is kind of a minor thing to be angry about, obviously, if your husband cheated on you or something, or your boyfriend, you know, did something major to hurt you, yeah, I'm not saying you should like stomp your feet and be cute about it. But if it's something minor, you know, and you and him both know that this is not a big deal, but he's really annoying you about something and you need to express that annoyance, you know, because we got to get our feelings out, then yeah, try to find maybe a silly kind of funny way to express it, because again, it can diffuse the tension. You'll both have a good laugh, and then from there you can get to work trying to solve the problem about what made one or both of you upset. So again, just some thoughts on that, and it's important, you know, it's important. So don't take everything so seriously.